From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
And welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here.
If the original Kingsman, The Secret Service, was all about using old-school flair to stylishly suit up a new punk generation of British secret agents, then its score by Henry Jackman and Matthew Marchesson similarly combined Bondian symphonic flair with hip rhythm, an approach that also fitted the fun of their score for Kingsman, The Golden Circle. But fashion was meant to change, especially when going back to the start of the Debonair Spies with The King's Man. And while filmmaker Matthew Vaughn is back in the director's chair for the third time with Mark Millar's comic book characters, the pointedly traditional symphonic take on this film score is now in the very capable hands of Matthew Margeson and Dominic Lewis. Having met while vetting such Henry Jackman scores as Puss in Boots, Captain America the Winter Soldier, and Matthew Vaughn's X-Men First Class, both composers would soon assume tailor-made leading musical roles. Marchesson with Skyline, Kick-Ass 2, and Rocket Man, and Lewis with MI5, The Man in the High Castle, and 2 Peter Rabbits. It's Marchesson's and Lewis's synergy on The King's Man that makes this the series' rousing high point in terms of conveying heroism for king and country, creating a thrilling history lesson awash in bold melodies and ripping thematic adventure. As Ray Fiennes and his band tried to stop the First World War, Marchesson and Lewis played powerful seriousness and thrilling fun. Whether lamenting the greatest generation lost to the trenches or doing a Rasputin saber Cossack dance by way of the 1812 Overture, it's unabashedly symphonic, emotional action scoring the way they used to do it for an origin film end score that couldn't be more vibrantly fresh.
And now let's welcome two composers who show that great film music maketh the men, Matthew Marchesson and Dominic Lewis.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, it's great to have you here. And again, I want to give a big shout out to La La Land Records. We've got the first 2 Kingsman soundtracks to give away if you're in the U.S., so send us your questions. So how did you first meet?
Dom and I. Oh, man.
Well, yeah. Well, it was that remote. It must have been a remote control.
Yeah.
When was probably the kitchen.
Yeah.
making coffee. It was like a few months before we actually worked together on a project, though, right?
Yeah, I don't even remember what the first thing we kind of cross paths work-wise was. Do you? So like Henry's X-Men, maybe.
Oh, yes, absolutely right. That was the first one.
Yeah.
X-Men First Class. But we would have met before that.
Yeah.
In the kitchen or on remote campus and just kind of, shooting the shit and hanging out.
Yeah, indeed.
So at remote control, what's the process really to, there's so many people who work there, and it really can become a team effort. But what did you find the key to success to getting your own voices out there, amidst all those people?
I was at remote control for a long time and I was working there for a couple years as an assistant to a couple different composers, Klaus Badelt and then Jim Dooley, and then just started kind of collecting my own gear, talking to the studio managers there and Hans and getting a little space to kind of set up a hodgepodge rig, and just started kind of helping those composers there that were doing films that just needed a little nudge across the finish line, whether it was time constraints or they had overlapping projects that needed some help, and doing a cue here for this person, a cue here for that person. And that was just kind of it. And I really cherished that time because I got to kind of be a little bit of a chameleon and learn from so many different people, learn really positive things, and also kind of learn from others' mistakes candidly. So that was my kind of experience. You're slightly different. You kind of just jumped in a bit more quickly, didn't you, Dami?
You put that so diplomatically. Yeah, no, I was very lucky. I was fortunate enough to meet Rupert Gregson-Williams at 15. And he kind of mentored me through my college days. And then I sort of got fast-tracked to the additional composer. So I didn't have to do all the tech stuff, which, yeah. So I think a few people may resent me for that secretly. But yeah, no, I got very lucky. And I got some doors opened for me that not everyone has. And fortunately I walked through them, and like Matt, just being around those big heavy hitters and learning everything you can, positively and negatively, like mistakes and positive stuff. So I thank my lucky stars. I got very lucky, but I grabbed the opportunity with both hands, and no one was going to take it from me. So.
Now, I guess the first Matthew Vaughn film that you both worked on was the second Kingsman. And you obviously, I think, Matthew, you worked in the very first one.
Yeah, I don't know. Dom did some pretty did some pretty important cues on the first one. Didn't have a hand in the second one. But I think even before that, in the wings, we keep saying, we each did a fair amount of music on the or arranging for Henry on X-Men First Class, I think, which was even before Kick-Ass. I don't even remember the timeline of these things. I'm pretty sure it was.
I don't remember either. I think it was before.
Yeah. So that was our kind of first.
Kick-Ass was as Henry's introduction to Matthew. So that Kick-Ass
the first Kick-Ass
one.
Yeah, which I did a couple cues on. And that was just a shit show. I mean, Henry had already kind of written the score. Because it was, I think, 3 or 4 different composers listed on that film, and they had all kind of already gone over to London to score, and it was during that week of scoring that Matthew Vaughn kind of chucked out some cues at the very last minute, and that's I just happened to be mates with Henry at the time and helping. I did a little bit of work for him on Monsters vs. Aliens, and so he gave me a call and was like, "Look, mate, we've got 3 days left of scoring. Can you do a couple cues and just hammer them out and see if Matthew likes them?" And luckily he did, and that was kind of my introduction to Matthew.
Weirdly, I met Henry excuse me, for the first time whilst he was doing Kick-Ass, and he thought I was a singer. He brought me in to do some vocal stuff and had no idea that I wanted to be a composer. I think it was for the Big Daddy. Was he called Big Daddy? Is that right? When he's like in the warehouse and everything's burning, and there was so he got me to do some vocal stuff for that. I don't even know if that cue got approved, but that's the first time I had the experience of working on a Matthew Vaughn thing. But then I came onto the first Kingsman and did some additional stuff on that, but I didn't work on the second one. No.
Now, one thing that going to the Kingsman, I mean, the one thing that really, threw me for a pleasant loop was that this is actually a much more serious film than the other 2 movies, but it's also fun, but it's got much more of a serious tone and an emotional tone to it. I mean, how did that affect your approach to the score?
I think it's pretty obvious that once we started reading the script and seeing some of the material that was coming in, it needed to be a more serious. I mean, it's a period piece with I'd say less of a Vaughn injection, where he has this kind of like action satire, bit going on. But yeah, I think we definitely, as far as just tonally in this film, the tunes are a bit more serious. The orchestration's definitely more serious. There's no kind of modern electronics and guitars and basses and drum kits floating around like there are on the first 2. Without diving into too much detail, I'd say in a general sense, that's the difference.
Yeah, I mean, as with the movie, we kind of eventually get there, and I think we start out with a very traditional throwback orchestral sound, and as we move closer and closer towards the action, we kind of had to still with the kind of traditional throwback orchestra in mind, but we had to sort of adapt our skills to abide by the Matthew Vaughn rules to be kind of visceral and modern. So while we didn't reach for a guitar or reach for some drums or whatever, we kind of adapted our writing in order to kind of fit his visceral sensibilities the further the movie got to kind of the Kingsman being formed and revealed.
I mean, like, right from the opening screens, I thought I was watching Lawrence of Arabia. I mean,
That's nice.
Yeah, I mean,
Take that as a compliment.
We'll take it as a compliment. I mean, we really did want to kind of write something that was a throwback to the reasons we got involved in film music and all those scores that made us fall in love with film music. So yeah, while obviously not trying to steal anyone, we just had this, our brains are full of all that material anyway, and we just kind of wanted to create the best sort of modern throwback score we could.
what were some of the scores that, I mean, just for inspiration, that you went to when you were scoring this?
Lawrence of Arabia. No, tough one. I mean,
nothing specific, right, Matt?
Yeah,
we didn't kind of like, we didn't go listen
really
to anything. We just sort of, as I said, we kind of got a library of all that stuff in our head anyway. And we just wanted to kind of really focus on melody, really focus on orchestration in a traditional sense.
Yeah.
And just with the two of us having, double the musical library, we just sort of came to things quite naturally rather than, going to reference things and listening to lots of music. We just sort of, it was clear to us what it needed to be. So there wasn't much kind of cross-referencing and listening to old stuff. Just, it was already up there in the old skulls, I think.
And again, to reiterate the balancing act, because Matthew, as Dom mentioned earlier, Matthew Vaughn has his limitation of how traditional and how what's the right word? Just how strict we can be on some of these orchestrational techniques and instruments that we can use. I remember really early on when we were writing away from picture, because there's the three kings. There's the three entities. You have Ferdinand, not Ferdinand. We have King George, Wilhelm, and who's the third? Dom, help me out.
Nicholas.
Tsar Nicholas. And so first, I remember like very early days. Do you remember this fugue that I wrote?
Yeah.
Maybe it could be a cool idea to write a three-part fugue. Not and being really strict on all the rules and everything. And that, it's like, and we showed Matthew, and he's like, what is this? This is not our film. Like, when did we go into like Baroque? So it was a balancing act, of being traditional but figuring out where Matthew's meter was.
Yeah, I got into trouble too with a couple of early scenes with just being far too floral with the orchestration and getting a few slap on the wrists, being like, "What is this? It sounds like animation. We're not doing an animation. What are you doing?" So yeah, there was definitely a line we couldn't cross.
And this actually brings us to our first question. It's from YouTube, from the Bond Music. And he would like to know, how do you work independently deciding in advance who will compose music for each particular scene, as Bernard Herrmann and Alfred Newman did on The Egyptian? That's a throwback.
Wow.
We really didn't have a kind of strict protocol for it. It was like, do you want to do this one? Do you want to do this one? I think we pretty much just, besides a couple areas, we pretty much worked linearly, right? I mean, for the most part, we kind of started at the beginning of the film and kind of worked our way through. But yeah, it was just it was just kind of a natural process, organically choose. Yeah.
Other than working linearly and just it being very natural, we did at the beginning set out to kind of flip the script, because Matt and I often get put in boxes about the kind of music we do, whether it's action or emotional. So we just wanted to kind of do the stuff we don't normally do on a day-to-day basis. Well, more of it anyway, which I think really helped kind of give a fresh flavor to this prequel.
Wow, very cool. I mean, I have to say, I think one of my favorite cues I have heard this year is the Rasputin dance fight. I mean, was that shot to the music? I mean, how you literally go out in and out of Tchaikovsky, then you bring in the Kingsman theme. I mean, who came up with this idea and how did it get done?
Dom, you want to take this? It's
so
complicated.
I don't really remember. I know that a lot of we were trying to find a place. I say Matthew Vaughn was trying to find a place where he could have a needle drop in that kind of Matthew Vaughn way. And much like our discoveries with, not having any guitars or synths or anything for the score, we were finding that any modern songs just weren't really working. Fine for Trailers, very cool for that kind of sudden impact, but within the scope of the movie and within the story arc, it just wasn't working. So I can't remember who came up with the idea of 1812, but it just sort of stuck, and Matthew loved it, and then we were charged with kind of interweaving the Kingsman stuff in between it, and getting out of 1812 and into Kingsman stuff and into Rasputin things. So that recording session was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, giving something that the players have played 1,000 times before, but with a bit of a twist on it, reorchestrating kind of a little bit here and there. We looped a couple bars here and there and recorded it that way. And I think we actually recorded choir on that piece too, which isn't in the original orchestration, just to give it a bit of extra oomph. And it was definitely because I remember we had written this tune for Rasputin, because originally in some of the earlier cuts of the film, he was in it much more and really warranted his own theme pulling you through the narrative. And so we do get that tune at the back half of the Rasputin fight scene. And originally, I think that might have been first, and then it went into 1812, and then we played around with it, and we would chop them both up, and then it ultimately started with 1812 and went into the Rasputin. So it was just a bit of trial and error with test screening audiences and just cutting things up and trying different things until it felt right.
Yeah, it was nice to be able to get to use that theme though, because we had it with the script, and Matthew said we need this theme from Rasputin, and it's going to get played by a guy sitting at the bottom of the mountain, and Rasputin's going to do this dance and kill a bunch of people, but it's going to be sort of like score, so it's going to be the guy sitting there playing it, so we need it so we can give it to the actor to play it. So that happened. We did that, wrote the theme, when it got filmed and everything, and then as ever, movies change, and that scene never happened in the movie, and we were at a point where, like, do we even need this theme anymore? And then the dance fight happened, and it was really great to be able to really realize what we'd imagined that theme becoming, with balalaikas and all kinds of crazy things, and very traditional Russian dance style. So it was really cool that we actually did get to use it eventually.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it seemed like the movie was so wonderfully edited to that the music, the score itself, would have definitely influenced the editing of the film itself.
Yeah, well, that's one of the pluses of working with Matthew and being able to. I mean, Dom and I both moved over to London to work on this film for a good part of a year, and we were in the same building with editorial, so it's very easy when you're all working so closely like that to go down to editorial and just talk to the editors and say, hey, can you give me 4 more frames here, or do you think can you take off 10 frames here, because it will really help our tempo and really marry the music to the picture quite well, and to have that dialogue and that relationship and that trust between the two departments, obviously with Matthew still holding the reins of everything, but it's nice. You're never kind of sitting there going, how am I going to make this work if I only had a couple more frames, or if they could flip these shots or something, and to not be hesitant to talk to the other departments about that was fantastic.
I mean, I guess that was pretty much the idea, was that as we kind of boundary. I mean, I have to give this movie credit. I've actually never understood why World War I happened until I saw this film. It's like by far the best history lesson I've seen about World War I. And again, it's interesting. I love it how the movie just kind of globetrots. And again, was that always the intention to kind of bring in, like, the music for Russia, music for Germany, this whole kind of melting pot, as it were?
Very much so, right, Matt? We were especially with the 3 axes and having the Russian element, the German element, the English element. It was, I think, actually at the beginning of the process, we were trying to kind of bring that home even more. But I'm glad that still comes across, because I thought we'd sort of lost a little bit of that. But that was definitely the intent, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know the exact timing, but Tom, remember when we started on this film, the original assembly was probably like over 4 hours, and we were like, there was so much story, and how is Matthew going to chop this down, and what are those areas that are the fat that could be trimmed a bit, and figuring out if we should stay away from these areas because that's weak and that's definitely going to get cut, or so it was a little bit of it was just a long journey, man, figuring it all out, and we started so early that the score I mean, even with the Shepherd, he went through iterations tonally of what the score was. It went on forever, and it's tough to remember all the different little eras of it.
I think, another really stunning musical sequence in the film, and in so many ways, is the big, run in the trench, to the, this horribly inadvertent, ironic death. And I just love the whole idea of this kind of silent knife fight that they, and again, and it's scored pretty differently than anything else, where you kind of are bringing in these kind of what seems to be electronic percussive elements. How did you want to score that? Again, essentially, where, like a knife fight, where if anyone says anything, they'll get annihilated, but they're still going to go for it.
I don't even remember what the conversations were about that. I remember there was a lot, because that whole sequence does start in silence. There's no music.
Yeah.
And
so originally it was supposed to be all silent.
All silence. Yeah.
And then, everyone realized pretty early on, it was like, we can't, it's cool, but we can't last this long. We need some support.
Yeah. And it's, I remember talk about where does music come in? We have this visceral kind of disorienting scene. Where does music come in? Does it come in hard? Do we kind of sneak music in so you don't know? So there was a lot of trial and errors with that. And I remember a lot of discussions with Matthew and our music editor, Jack, about, I mean, you're right, Daniel, I think that's the only, maybe one other place where we kind of interject non-Western orchestral.
I think it's the only place.
Yeah, where there is some electronics, and I think that was quite fitting. I mean, it's the one scene. I mean, you have towards the end of the film, you have more traditional action scenes with, for lack of a better term, in like an Indiana Jones style, where there's ropes flying, and it's more of an adventure. But this scene is quite visceral, and just the color palette of the scene, the pace of the scene, the sound effects of the scene, and so I think the music in that scene is also less traditional. There's no tune. There's really no harmony. It's just, we just really experimented with the orchestra in just making tones and making visceral sounds. And then even got those recording backs and kind of chopped them up and panned them around. And the goal is to kind of really put you in Conrad's place from his point of view and make you as disorienting and sitting on the edge as much as we could help that.
It was a total experiment, though. I mean, I remember Matt coming up with these really cool string things, like all the triplety stuff, and it was so cool and so different to everything else that, when we were sitting in your room, Matt, I think, and we played it back to Mr. Vaughan, and I mean, I don't know if I ever told you this, but I was sitting there going, "Oh no, he's not going to like it. It's so cool." I think it's a bit far for, I think it might be a little bit far. And he kind of sat there and he went, "Yeah, no, that's cool." And it was great because I think we'd gone through a couple of things, right? A couple of ideas. And it was great that, with the experiment and really kind of pushing the envelope and trying to do something different actually won the day in the end, because it really helps that scene. I think it's amazing.
And then obviously you have the incredible scene of him, carrying the guy over his shoulders as he's making it. And that's like a big music moment. That's like the biggest music moment in the entire film. Talk about scoring that. And what I mean, obviously I like this more. No, please forgive me. I liked it more than 1917, but what went into that whole sequence again, where it's just so music driven?
I think we kind of made the decision that, we realized this was going to be a massive music moment. And then, we need to really kind of show off the main Kingsman theme as much as possible. And really kind of make it as sort of British as possible and sort of rousing and epic as it could go. So, there's huge choirs. It was quite tricky, actually, because it was originally longer, obviously, and then it got cut down, right, Matt, to almost half. So we really had to figure out, okay, we have these phrases. How do we kind of truncate these things to actually still make sense? And I think it actually still got cut again before it went in the movie. And then, the album version is different to the movie version, because Matthew, during scoring, right, Matt, had a note on the end of it, and he wanted it to keep going up.
Yeah, I remember the two hurdles of that scene. Was one a very kind of typical Matthew Vaughn. We need to bring it to the next level. Okay, we've gone to the next level. No, we need to go even another level up on that. So the once you kind of pull out all the stops and the violins are playing in octaves and you have full, the whole, everyone's playing at their, really blasting. How do you even then evoke more emotion? And so that was one challenge. I remember Dom just going through the ringer on that cue. And the other one was the kind of, when do you start scoring a film? Because that was a perfect example of, you never know this when you start, but one might argue that, you wrote that scene, Dom, too early, because it's this beautiful scene, it worked perfect, and then we've taken off 13 seconds, okay, and then you make that adjustment. We've put back 6 seconds, but now we've taken off 20 seconds from earlier on, and it's you get to the point where do you kind of start over, or how much of it is salvageable and still sound like the
what you meant it to be.
It's intent. Yeah.
And I think that's credit to Jack Dolman, who has done all these Matthew Vaughn movies, and without him, with the picture changing as much as it did, I think a lot of our intent musically would have got lost. But everything was always run by us, made sure that it was making sense, and if we had to make any changes in the sequence or anything like that, we did. So it's a cool moment, him running through the trenches, and it's definitely the most epic thing I think I've ever written.
It's great sequence. So now we've got a question from Donato. It's nice to have an opportunity to talk with you. I'm an emerging composer of a music for films, and what are the basic steps to start working in the world of cinema? Or at least, I guess, for you two, how did you get to where you were?
I mean, it's a huge unanswerable. It's an unanswerable question, especially now, because I mean, like, if you look at the tenure of our career, Dom, we're no spring chickens anymore, and I think
I know
the industry.
We're even dressing the same.
I know. Sweaters, get off my lawn.
Sweaters, beards, and hats.
I mean, 20 years ago when I came to LA, the obvious thing for me when I asked myself those who, why, where, what, and when questions were to figure out if I can apprentice somebody, or if I can assist somebody, or if I could be on the fly in the wall, in any regard. And so I was lucky enough to be able to do that and kind of be at the right time, at the right place, and figure out the politics of the city and industry. But that's always changing too. And now with the streaming, the beautiful thing about the streaming market is is that there's so much content out there now. We're not limited to the number of channels on one axis and the amount of hours in the day on the other. It's just infinite content that can be produced and streamed, and so the work is there to do. It's and then with technology and sample libraries getting better, and now with COVID kind of bringing to the table the fact that we don't, it is, I'll still argue, again, get off my lawn, that it's better to be in the same room with somebody, because you're actually creating an energy and vibing off of each other. But that doesn't necessarily have to happen now. I mean, in the past year and a half, I have not really had any in-person meetings, besides a couple of scoring sessions and recording sessions. But you can really now be anywhere in the world and do this. It's just how to get the foot in the door is the kind of existential question, isn't it? Which is a tough one.
I don't think there's any one way to get into the world of cinematic music. I think we get asked this question a lot, and it's whatever suits your work ethic, your flow. And I think ultimately, if you want it bad enough, it's so cheesy to say, but if you do want it bad enough, you will get there in some shape or fashion. Speaking from personal experience, I know I was kind of given a leg up, and I was the right doors were open for me. But I did move 6,000 miles away from my family, and there was nothing that was ever going to stop me from doing this job. Now I'm fortunate enough to be doing some big movies and working with people like Matt and Matthew Vaughn and David Leitch and amazing people. But I never dreamed that I'd get as far as I have done at the age of 36. I thought I'd be doing something, additional music, some little things here and there. So,
are you only 36?
I am only 36.
Ah, you are a spring chicken.
I don't feel like one.
Youngling.
I've lost all my hair, so if you want to keep your hair, don't get into film music. That's one thing I would say. No, but I mean, I think it's important that you do you, and again, without sounding cheesy, which it does, as if you want it that bad, there is a route into what you want to do, and just keep going, learn your tech, which I didn't really do, and
learn how to program,
and just listen. Whilst you've got the time, just listen to everything from, Bach to Stockhausen to I don't know, Jay-Z to just listen to everything, because I think that's one thing that's really helped Matt and I, is that we have many strings to our bow, and we can kind of dip into any genre we need to, and we're not, although in our additional lives we might have got put in boxes, but as the guys in the chair now, we can, if you look at our IMDb's, we do a lot of differentiating movies and things that are eclectic. So I know I've waffled on, sorry, but yeah, we get asked that question a lot. So
well, here's one from Dale for you. What are some of the challenges in scoring a prequel, especially having been involved in the earlier films? Matthew, for you, what themes that had already been established did you want to bring back here? I mean, did you have a book of themes? Okay, this is appropriate or this is too modern, when doing this movie?
Well, we have there's the main Kingsman theme from the first two films, which was talked about with me, Dom, and Matthew really early on, that the roadmap for that would be, we would hear it at the very, very beginning when we have the Kingsman logo, and we wouldn't hear it again until the end of the film, because story-wise, the Kingsmen the organization's not established yet, and so it just made sense that we wouldn't hear that. We would have, so we created a new Kingsman theme. And as far as the new themes go, Dom, you put it really well, saying we took some of the harmonic language from the previous films and said, what are these chord sequences we're using? What are the scales that we're using? Let's write some new things that still evoke the same world, but slightly differently, and tunes that we haven't heard before.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Definitely. I think that, you kind of said it there, that we don't quote the Kingsman theme until the Kingsman organization has been formed, and obviously with the logo at the beginning. But other than that, you may hear it in certain kind of lines that reference back to the movies, Oxford's Brogues and Oxford's Rogues and all that kind of thing. But you'd have to really be alert to notice them. And then I think there was such a huge focus on new melody and really catchy, strong melodies with the orchestra for this one, that it was great to be able to just kind of start afresh with Matt and come up with stuff together and not have to really rely on the old stuff, because we were doing a prequel.
I mean, one thing I really liked about the film as well is that there's some real surprises in it, because usually in every single movie like this, the father gets killed and the son's got to avenge him. But the big twist in this is that the son gets killed. The movie's been out, so I'll blow it. The son gets killed, and it's got to be Ralph Fiennes who saves the day. And he's a much older guy than you ever get, at least in Hollywood films, to be an action hero. How did that affect the score? Basically having dad save the day.
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, that is I would say, without having thought about it before, that is, I mean, that's kind of when we're entering the third act, is when Conrad is dispatched from life, and musically, I think there is where we kind of, there's this whole eulogy sequence, but after that is where we kind of, both what's on the screen and what you're hearing both kind of leans a little bit more on more of the Vaughn isms, a little bit more visceral on the action, a little bit more tongue-in-cheek on some of the comedy and some of the satire, some of the lines. So I think that is certainly a turning place, especially with Rafe's character, where he finally, as being a pacifist and not wanting to go to war, and really the whole movie up until that point preaching to Conrad, his son, that there are other ways to get this done rather than war. And then at that point he's kind of like, fuck it, I mean, we gotta go and do this. And so everything kind of gets turned on its side a little bit at that point in the film.
Subconsciously, that's probably why you know, when we were trying to kind of get stuff through, and you know, do we reach for the guitars? Do we reach for the synths at this point? Because it is becoming more of a Kingsman movie. You know, you bring up a good point, Daniel, is that maybe that's why those things weren't working, because at the helm of everything is Ray Fiennes, who is an older gentleman, you know, taking down the bad guys. And so, you know, I don't think there was, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there was a conscious decision to kind of, you know, score the old guy kicking ass. But I think maybe it's a good point. Maybe that's why the more modern elements didn't work. And, you know, it is more kind of a swashbuckle thing and a throwback thing for him because he is that bit older and kicking butt. So maybe.
Now, I'd love to talk about some of your amazing individual accomplishments, you know, beyond the Kingsman. And that brings us to a question by by Louis Versinelli. And again, one of my favorite films that you've scored, Matthew, which is Eddie the Eagle. One of my all-time favorite scores that you've composed was to Eddie the Eagle. And this is from Louis. Can you talk about that score, and were you involved with the writing or collaboration of some of the songs to the soundtrack? Case in point, the song Ascension, which is such a great song in the soundtrack.
Yeah, no, I didn't really have any. The only time I kind of barely cross-pollinated with the songs in that movie was at the very, very end when he finally jumps the 90 meter, and the score kind of segues into Van Halen's Jump. And really the only consideration was like tempo and key, and how can we kind of get in this get into the song so it sounds a bit natural. And really, I mean, one of the most fun times I've ever had working on, I mean, the subject material was great. Being able to kind of mess around with some of these older synths was fantastic and just different for me. And I remember at the very beginning, we had all these discussions about the score and what it would be, and if we wanted to lean. There was a lot of discussions about making it a more heartfelt, traditional, almost like in the Rudy vein of a sports underdog, that kind of rousing orchestral thing. And it was actually Matthew who was like, let's just give the 80s thing its day in the sun. And so I wrote this suite, which was about 8 or 9 minutes long, and it just kind of went through all the themes, and we gave it to the music editor in stems, and he kind of chopped it up. And the whole opening of that film, the first like maybe 10 minutes of it was a series, you know, when you're watching young Eddie grow up, and he wanted to be in the Olympics, but he wasn't very good at anything, and his like little, you know, relationship hurdles with his parents. And it was like 2 or 3 back-to-back songs, which made it feel very, very long. And it's a funny way to open up a film with segueing pop songs, like 2 or 3 or 4 of them in a row. So I gave this suite to our music editor, Jack Dolman, again, who kind of chopped it up and rearranged it and you know, tracked it in the film to the opening, and it just made the whole entire opening flow much more. We started calling it the Overture because it was just a really kind of nice intro to this beautiful story. And you know, a little tweaking after that to iron out some of the edits, and that's actually what's in the movie and what's on the album is that original suite that was kind of hacked up and put back together to fit the picture.
So Dom, actually, again, we've got 2 Kingsman CDs left, so sending 2 more questions and that's it. Now, Dom, you scored, I think, one of the great documentary series I've ever seen, which is Man in the High Castle.
Right.
Sorry.
Right.
I'm sorry, it is a documentary. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just a terrifying show, especially now more than ever. What was it just like working on the series? And can you tell me what the ending meant? I've always been trying to figure that out. Tell me about scoring the climax of this.
Yeah, I mean, I still miss working on that show. It just had so many possibilities, and the canvas was so great musically. And you know, to be given free rein on something is always lovely. Yeah, it was scary at times because it felt very real. And I remember I was scoring it during the 2016 election, and you know, we were just sitting there going, "Oh yeah, no, it's not going to happen. It will be fine." Blah blah blah. And then the next day, it kind of hit home that, you know, that Mr. Trump had won. So, yeah, it was an awesome experience. The end scene, I think the end scene, it's just, I mean, it's all the people coming through from the other realms. You know, as Kadic can get very kind of what's the word? His stuff is so awesome and very kind of based in lots of different realms and sci-fi and cool. So it was just nice to kind of wrap everything up thematically. I think I got every theme in there. The goal was to get every theme in there and not make it sound like a dog's dinner. So I hope I hope I was successful in doing that. But so I was trying to weave in the multiple Juliana themes and the necklace theme and all. I basically tried to get all of them in. I think I got all of the main ones in. So hopefully it didn't sound like too much of a mess. But yeah, it was. I think it's meant to be kind of open-ended, but so the literal version of it is that it's that the doors of all the realms had been opened, and everyone was coming through the open door. So
well, let's hope the Nazis lost finally. But I'll tell you,
that they definitely they lost.
I mean, one of my favorite, if not my single favorite cue you did on that series was, again, talk about setting the tone for the Kingsman. I believe it's the episode in season 2 where we finally reveal the time machine, and these poor people are sent through. And again, it literally is scored like, where's Blofeld watching this?
Yeah.
Talk about that sequence.
Well, season 2, season 1 had been very intimate and very small, and that one I did with Henry, and we kind of really wanted to keep it character based. And then season 2, the sort of the gloves were off, the handcuffs were off, and it was it was temped with very epic stuff. So it was just a really cool opportunity to get big. And then with that last sequence where they're kind of it's harrowing. I mean, sometimes scoring that kind of stuff, you do have to take a break because you watch it over and over again, and it's really it really gets to you. But I just wanted to make it as dark and as epic and sort of as horrifying as possible, and not in a really traditional way, because although there's some really dark noises and some horrible sounds going on there, the harmonic and the melodic content of that cue is almost sort of, it could be described as almost euphoric, or it's very major in its composition. So often in that show, what I tried to do is, when the Nazis were doing horrific shit, I would sort of, flip the script and make it kind of a major thing and kind of almost a patriotic thing, which to any normal person watching it would make you feel extremely uncomfortable and sort of horrified by what's going on. So with any of those horrific Nazi scenes, that's what I tried to do, to kind of flip the script and to make it feel almost normal and to be in the Nazi shoes. So then us as, hopefully normal people will be like, oh my God, this is just awful.
Now, Matthew, you've done some really unique scores, and I think, one really small little film that I really quite liked was Buffaloed, about a woman gaming the healthcare system. And then right after Buffaloed, you do, again, a really kind of wonderfully transparent score for Rocket Man, which has got to dance around, Elton John. I mean, what were those two experiences like?
Buffalo was a trip, man. That was a really, really cool experiment. I had been getting burnt out is the wrong way, but like I wanted to, lots of conversations with my agent about like I would love to have a calling card for something that's a bit smaller, and like I've kind of been doing all these scores that require, it sounds like such a terrible problem to have, but that require 60 to 80 piece orchestras and recording some stuff. And I was like, well, let's see if we can do a film that's like small and a little bit less serious musically. And so we started reading scripts for these indie films, and I really connected with just the vibe of this script. It was just a bit scrappy in a really cool way. And so we reached out to the director, Tanya Wexler, who was in New York, and I flew myself over there to meet her and just spend a couple of days with her and talking about music. And she let me take a couple of the scenes back and just kind of experiment with them. And it was a really cool. I have a bunch of musicians that I went to college with that live all over the world, mostly all over the United States now. A couple in Nashville and New York, up in San Francisco. And I had this idea of doing this kind of like funky, jazzy not as electronic as the David Holmes Ocean 11 stuff, but just in that vein of like lots of cool tempos and lots of cool grooves, and it would kind of make these maps and kind of program some drum stuff and send it out with direction to some brass players that I knew or some guitar players that I knew, and just said, you know, do your thing and jam, and let's get on Zoom. And this is, I mean, or it wasn't Zoom at the time. It was probably like FaceTime or Skype, but and then get these recordings back, and just kind of, then I would lay some stuff on them, some keys and some organ, piano, whatnot. We'd get some drummers to play on them. And so for that score, none of the musicians are actually in the same room. It was really cool how it became this like modularly assembled score, which I had so much fun doing. And when you let players have a little bit of freedom, that's so much of the time where the magic happens. You know, it's like, here's the lead line, this is what I want you to play, but also then do a pass where you're riffing on it, or do a pass where you're just, you know, interpreting it your own way. And it was I had a lot of fun doing that score that way. It was a new experience for me. Yeah.
Now, Dom, you have actually made Orson Welles spin in his grave, because Peter Rabbit voted the best film, essentially the best rated movie ever made. And obviously the second one got raves. What was it like, essentially scoring a kid's movie that just became this phenomena almost?
It was so great. I mean, I can't lie. I read Peter Rabbit as a child, and I remember reading this. I got sent the script, and I rang Spring, who's the head of music at Sony, and I was like, "What do I got to do to get this film? I'll do anything to get this film." Having that connection with Peter Rabbit, and then, you know, I was on it really early. It was a really cool way of sort of getting the gig. There was no one else. I was told there was no one else up for the gig, and I did a couple of demos for Will Gluck, the director, who, before doing these movies, these are his words, not mine, he has a kind of troubled relationship with film music. He's not the biggest fan of it, and in his other movies he tends to use songs to score. So, you know, those first two demos I did, I was really conscious of being sort of song based and going you know, more kind of the band route. And actually, what the first thing I did was the Beatrix Potter flashback with all the original illustrations. And he was like, "Oh, it's great, I love it, but it's too modern. We need to go traditional with it." So that was like, you know, red rag to a bull. So I did the, you know, what is now on the soundtrack, I think it's The Tale of Peter Rabbit. I think that's what I called it. And that's kind of what got me the gig. And from that point on, you know, I had to kind of bring the band back and to get stuff through. And it was sort of like, you know, all the song aspects, the drums and the bass and the guitars and stuff. And then as soon as I sort of slapped a big old pastoral orchestra on top of it, Will was like, "Yeah, that's it. That's the sound." So I feel very fortunate to be the composer for those movies, and for them to be kind of loved, because it's sort of, when you take on sacred material, there are obviously going to be people that don't like it, you know. And Will is great. He's very very self-aware, and if you've seen the films, you'll know that, you know, there's many jokes where, you know, she says she'll be spinning in her grave if someone's to adapt this into some, you know, whatever, probably done by an American. So there's some really cool little jokes in there. You know, Will was very aware that he was dealing with sacred material, and I think he did a wonderful job, and I'm very thankful to be a part of it.
Now, here's going back to Louis Versalini. He would love to know which of the 3 Kingsman movies was the most challenging one to score, and why? And also, the way the new movie ended, are you anticipating a 4th Kingsman movie? I think Matthew even announced he's going to be doing it.
Yeah, well, in reverse order, I think Matthew has alluded, I know, a couple times to doing a third Kingsman movie involving the Eggsy Harry storyline and finishing out the kind of Taron Egerton Colin Firth trilogy. As far as this one, I mean, the tag at the end certainly leaves it open, although I don't think Dom, or I mean, I don't even think Matthew knows if he'll do another Kingsman. I think that's just yet to be determined if he feels like doing it or not. And then as far as I mean, you were involved in two of them, Dom. I think they each had their own challenges, to be perfectly honest with you. You know, the first Kingsman, the biggest challenge was obviously figuring out the tone of what we were doing and how we wanted to approach a kind of modernized take on the British spy genre. The second one was a lot. The most fun part about that score was kind of being able to marry the traditional orchestral elements and the Western, the fiddles and the dobros and the banjos, and having that element, which you really can't fake. You really need to know what you're doing. So we worked with a lot of really like players. I mean, the guitar player we had was raised in Kentucky, and we got some fiddle players from. I actually hired some fiddle players from Nashville to play on that, and I remember a big hurdle on that one was that after we had recorded the whole entire score, Matthew called and said, I don't think Poppy, Julianne's character, I don't think her theme is working anymore. So we had to, I mean, at the very end of the process, you know, rewrite Julianne Moore's character themes and find out all these spots throughout the film that they are, and seeing if we can swap them out and treat them slightly differently. And something similar, if you want to talk about that, Dom, with the Shepherd happened on this film, which was a challenge in itself of kind of redoing a lot of the baddie music.
Yeah, I mean, I think each movie has a common denominator in that, you know, there are things that change late in the day. I can't speak for the second one because I wasn't on it, but I remember being around on the first one and notes coming in that sort of prompted Matt to have to kind of rewrite a lot, if not all, of the action stuff in Reel 5. And, you know, we were, a week away from scoring or something. And it was the 11th hour. And, well, I do remember you talking about the Poppy stuff having to get changed. And then similarly on this one, you know, we had a baddie theme for the better part of a year. And then, you know, things changed with the edit. They wanted to focus more on really making the Shepherd the overall residing bad guy. I think Matthew felt that maybe Rasputin was getting a bit too much screen time, and so that's why the stuff at the beginning got cut out. And then, you know, fortunately for us, we had this little counter melody with the main Shepherd theme that at the beginning Matthew was not a fan of, and then I think we were just going through ideas for the theme, and then he sung it back to us on Zoom. And Matt and I were like, was that the thing that in the village? He was like, what's that? No, I don't like that. And it was the da da dee da 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 da. So, you know, we already had it. It's not like we had to come up with something new. And so we sort of just had to then go through and plug that through the film. So, yeah, it was 18 months of constantly trying to, you know, roll with the punches and adapt and moving to London. And so I think, in time-wise, that's probably the third one's probably the most the composers have spent on the movie. Would you say, Matt?
Yeah, without a doubt. First movie,
as I say, I mean,
yeah.
Right. As I say, I mean, with Matthew, it's, you know, he's always wanting what's best, and sometimes that means that in the 11th hour things have got to change. And so, I think all three have had their fair share of those little changes, big changes.
Well, I definitely know I can't wait to buy the 4K of this, which I imagine will likely have these cut scenes. And that brings us to a question from David Sayes Benestra. Congratulations on the score. He, again, as I said, it's a fabulous melodic symphonic adventure epic. Are there any chances of having it released on CD?
I don't think it will be. That's usually the studio and the record label's decision. It's a bit above our pay grade.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think Disney was just going to release this one digitally, unfortunately.
But yeah, it seems to be the way that companies are going now, that, you know, unlike us who want everything to have a physical thing.
Yeah. Well, and you arguably just get, I mean, not arguably, you just get better quality music. You get better quality files when you're listening to something at a higher res, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I have to say one thing, though. I think that the streaming platform has encouraged, well, me anyway, and a couple of other colleagues and composers I know to kind of just say to hell with it and put most of the score, if not the whole score, out. I think in the CD world and anything else, there was this sort of unwritten rule that you kind of just had to get the greatest hits and the best bits. But with the streaming platforms now, you know, my go-to now is just release the whole thing. So I think
really cool.
That's a good thing.
So I guess to wrap up the show, my climactic question, you know, again, I just love particularly the first film, you know, with how hip it is. And again, I love hip retro scoring, you know, where you're bringing in the fat brass and all the kind of cool spy jazz groups. But I think there's really something to be said about this movie and the score with how unhip it is and how just wonderfully old school and super melodic, super big the music is. I mean, do you think that is a lesson of some sort, or just proving a point where you can do like essentially a movie like this, but like super traditionally?
I think with the right film, there will always be a place for music like this, just a bit more traditional and a little bit more leaning on those devices that made, at least to me, I know, kind of fall in love with certain films as I was growing up.
Yeah, and you know, I think, you know, Matt and I talked about it lots, whether it's over a pint or dinner or whatever it might be during our friendship, is that the art of melody and really strong melodies and ones that, without sounding cheesy, you kind of walk out the cinema humming and it's stuck in your head, it is not around as much as it should be. So it was a very conscious decision for us to try and get that back, and really focus on the melodies, and I hope we did that. So I don't think, because, you know, when it's all well and good being hip and cool and coming up with cool beats and stuff, but you know, you don't walk out the cinema beatboxing or trying to emulate that cool noise that kept coming back. So it was really nice to just get back to the fundamentals and you know, traditionally write melodies and orchestrate in a traditional way.
Well, here. You definitely maketh the score. And Matthew and Dominic, I want to thank you both so much for joining us at Film Music Live. I want you all to watch The Kingsman in theaters with its score on Hollywood Records. I want to give a big thanks to Mark Northam, our producer Dale Turner, Mark Banning, Alex Beck, Jana Davidoff, and La La Land Records. And I will see you all on the next Film Music Live, January 10th, when we go to the Cobra Kai Dojo with composers Zach Robinson and Leo Birenberg. Thanks for watching, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.